Hearing how it's going.
Thanks so much, Doug, and thanks everybody for the opportunity to come and share all the exciting stuff that's going on at SIO for our GM1 gangliosidosis trial. And just a little bit about the company. As you know, we are involved with not only GM1 gangliosidosis, but we do have a study ongoing now for Tay-Sachs and Sandhoff disease. And then in addition to that, we have an adult Parkinson's disease study. So we're involved with 3 clinical stage programs, and we're very excited to be involved. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because several of the other speakers have outlined this, and most of the families have a very good understanding. I think the only point I want to make here is this is a systemic disease, right? So GM1, while the brain is one of the areas that is very much affected, there are other parts of the body that are affected as well. And so we've got to think about this as a systemic disease. So what is actual AAV GM1? Several of the other speakers have pointed out the fact that this gene therapy is the replacement of a defective gene by a gene that will actually produce the enzyme. And so AAV GM1 takes that gene, packages it into a vector called AAV9. And you know, one of the reasons, just an interesting thing, one of the reasons why we use viruses are very good at getting into cells. So while they don't replicate, these particular viruses don't replicate, they are fantastic carriers of the genes that they do what they do best and inject that gene into the cells for it to be able to get to where we need in order to be able to create the enzyme that is deficient in these children. So this drug or this product, we actually administer intravenously. And the reason that we do it intravenously is, as I had pointed out, is this is a systemic disease. And so therefore, we really believe, and we know that there's animal data to suggest that in fact, the best way to give this is to give it intravenously, since that would be the way in which it covers the whole body, both the systemic as well as the neurological. So we have started this study. We're very excited about the fact that we have dosed 5 patients. This is a study that is open to juvenile and late infantile patients and early infantile patients. I'll show you in a second what we're going to do. So the first cohort that we have enrolled so far are late infantile and juvenile patients, and that's at the low dose. And now we're enrolling at the high dose, similar group of patients, late infantile and juvenile patients. Then we'll be moving on to doing similar for the type 1 or the infantile onset patients, a low dose and then a high dose on those patients. Once we understand more about it and we understand what dose we should be using to get the most effect for the patients that are affected by the disease, we'll be moving into the so-called registrational part of the study, which is a study that we'll agree with for the FDA in order to be able to make sure that this product is safe and effective, and the FDA can give permission for it to be able to be used generally within the world. So as I mentioned, our patients that we're putting into the study are both the infantile onset as well as the late infantile and juveniles. And the study endpoints are somewhat similar to what have been described before. A dose ranging study, always safety and tolerability. And I'll show you some data that we've got from our study so far. This is a very safe product. So safety and tolerability is a very important piece. Then obviously we want to learn about whether there's an effect of the product. And so we look for a change in disease severity, motor function, developmental changes, and then we can measure on an MRI, we can measure changes in brain volume, as well as markers of disease progression, both in serum and in spinal fluid. So a lot of ways in which we can kind of get a 360 view of the effect that this particular product is having on the patients. So these are the patients that we've enrolled in the study so far. As I mentioned, we have 5 patients, 1 juvenile onset patient, and then 4 late infantile onset patients. You can see a variety of ages at which there was symptom onset from 16 to 30 months. And then the age of gene transfer was a little bit older than that, obviously, and between 32 and 68 months. And so 3 male patients and 2 female patients in the study. So there was a question earlier about what do we know about the safety of these products? And so since we know, obviously, because we've been able to treat some patients, we have not seen any serious adverse effects related to the gene therapy. There was one patient that did have a line infection because we needed intravenous line for the patients to be treated and to be provided with other medicines. And unfortunately, this patient developed an infection around that line and had to be removed and the patient had to be treated, but it really was in no way related to the gene therapy itself. There were some other effects that we saw of the patient. There was a transient increase in one of the liver enzymes and observed in 4 patients, but it resolved without any additional therapy needed to be given. And there were no other adverse effects that were indicative of liver dysfunction. And there are a number of tests that you can do in order to test liver function. And so the combination of some of them really give a good idea as to whether there's a liver function abnormality, and we really didn't see any of that at all. And so what we know is that there's a very favorable safety profile, even though this is administered intravenously, and there has been some concern about intravenous gene therapy. We have seen no abnormalities or no side effects that should be of any concern for patients to be continued in the study. And we've moved up to a high dose now, and the 2 patients that have been given a higher dose have had no complications either. So how can we assess whether these patients are doing well or how are they doing within the study? So these patients, there's a score that's called the clinical global impression. And this is an idea of how patients are doing in general, that the investigator gives a score to the patients. And remember, we're working with Dr. Cynthia Tift, who is really very, very experienced in knowing how to assess children. And so what we know of these children at baseline, you can see on the second column over here, right? There was one child that was markedly ill, one child was borderline, so not that sick, and then 3 of them were moderately ill. So what do we notice over time is how do these children change over time? And what we see is that most of the children were minimally improved or somewhat improved up to 6 months of age. And then the child that was the healthiest, so to speak, the borderline ill, really had no change. The other thing that we assessed was the mobility, right? So upright and floor mobility at 6 months. 4 out of the 5 patients were able to walk independently, and 5 out of the 5 patients, because of their age, crawled independently as well. Then it was mentioned that we are trying to look at some cognitive assessments of the patients as well. And so there's a score called the Vineland score, and it gives a really good indication of a good 360 view look of how patients are able to do from a mental state as well. So communication is a very important piece of that. And so we tested both receptive communication, which means the child's ability to understand, then expressive communication, the child's ability to actually communicate, whether it be with words or other ways to express themselves verbally. So what we saw over time is all the patients really from a receptive standpoint were stable over time. And as you all know, stability is a good thing. And on the expressive communication, there was some improvement in a couple of the children, and then one child did worsen over time over the first 6 months. What about personal, so activities of daily living, such as eating, dressing, washing, hygiene, all important things from a family standpoint. What difference or what effect would we see of the therapy? And what we've seen so far is really stability again between the start of the study and the 6 month time point. Remembering that this is a disease that might progress relatively slowly, especially in late infantile and juvenile patients. And so as they progress, we need to assess the patients for a longer time period. And so we'll be looking at them every 6 months. And then so in 12 months, in 6 months time, we'll be looking at the 12-month data as well. Motor skills, as we know, there are motor skills that need to be looked at. And again, you can see stability and a slight decrease. And then fine motor skills, slight improvement in one patient and the others somewhat stable. And then one child that seemed to do a little bit worse. One of the other things that I mentioned is that we are testing the enzyme. So if we're giving the gene and the gene is producing enzyme, that would be a really important thing. And so we're testing enzyme levels on the serum. And what we've seen is that from the start of the study to 6 months, the beta-gal enzyme, which is the enzyme that's needed in order to metabolize the GM1 ganglioside, increased between 33 and 128% across the patients. And so we're very pleased to see that there's an increase from baseline, and we'll continue to follow the patients, because I think what we know from Doug's work and from others, that that the longer you follow, certainly the animals, the higher you'll see the levels. And so our expectation, hopefully in the patients, is the longer duration, we'll see a higher level of beta-gal. So where are we? You know, as I said, I think this is very exciting. We've enrolled 5 patients at the low dose. We're going to be, we've enrolled 2 patients so far in the high dose. We'll be continuing and then starting on enrolling infantile patients into the study. We know that this, as I mentioned, the 6-month data really shows that it's very well tolerated. And so far the disease is stable, and we'll continue to follow the patients along to be able to see how it affects it over time. We are actively enrolling in the study, right? So we're still looking for patients. The question that always comes up is, so is this, while this study is being conducted only at the NIH, does that mean it's only US patients? And in fact, it's not, right? So we had 3 of the patients that are in the study came from Sweden. And so this study is open to children from anywhere in the world. And as other speakers have suggested before, we'll bear the cost of having people come to be enrolled in the study, and we'll take care of that part. And so we're continuing, as I said, to enroll patients. We're looking for additional readouts. As I said, we want to follow over time to see how things go over time. And so the 12-month data we hope to be able to talk about later in the year. And then the top-line data, 12-month top-line data from the first 2 patients receiving the high dose in the first half of next year. So we're excited to see that there's data that will be coming out as these patients progress. And we're looking forward to being able to add some juvenile patients into the study so we can see the effect of the product on them as well. And so, as I mentioned to you, the role of so we needed to do a dose ranging part of the study. So once we have an idea of what the best dose is, we need to go and have a meeting with the FDA. And our expectation is that we'll be able to have that meeting in the first half of next year so that we can then get on with the registrational part of the study to be able to assess whether this medicine is working, whether it's safe, and the FDA will agree to put it out on the market as soon as we're done with that. So that's almost my last slide. You know, it takes a village. And so we are delighted to be able to work with all of our collaborators. As Doug mentioned, this has been going on for a while for many folks that have been involved with this. And hopefully this is starting to be the culmination of all the hard work that's been put into it. And so we're delighted to be working with everybody. We're delighted to be working with the patient organizations, Cure, GM1, NTSAD, and all the others. And I really do believe if we all work together, we're going to be able to do something really special for these children. So I'll stop there, Doug, and happy to take any questions if there are.
Fantastic. I want to say thanks to all of the presenters today. This is so exciting for somebody like me who got into this many, many years ago when there really was nothing on the clinical horizon. And the first 3 speakers today are working towards clinical trials, and the last 3 speakers today are either in or almost in clinical trials. This is a fantastic day for those of us who've been around for a while, and I'm sure for the parents as well. Gavin, just a quick question on the graphs that showed the patient responses of the 5 patients. There were a lot of them were flat, some of them were slightly improved, some were slightly decreased. But how is 6 months long enough to say what that graph would look like in an untreated patient?
Yeah, as you know, this disease can progress relatively slowly, right? And so I don't know that we know at 6 months whether that's good enough. And as I think that we need to, you know, 12 months, the 12-month data, I think might be far more instructive than the 6-month data. So I'm really looking forward to being able to see that data because I do really believe that 6 months is a relatively short time period to be able to observe a real difference in these children. I think 12 months might be far more instructive.
Yeah. But it's great that we know the patients are producing beta-galactosidase, at least in the samples that you've taken and run. So any other questions from the gallery, from the panelists, parents? Okay, here's a question that says, my daughter has GM1 and she's 13 years old. And her question is about enrollment in the clinical trial. She has type 2 GM1.
To enroll in our study? You know, that is on the older side, and so I'm not sure that that's a patient that that would be able to be enrolled in our study. But I think the important thing is for folks that want to be enrolled in the study or want to be considered. I think it's important to talk to Dr. Tift and the folks at the NIH, because ultimately it's the clinicians that make the assessments as to whether the patient should get into the study or not.
Right. And so you mentioned the registration trial, which is coming up if things continue to go well. If the registration trial goes well, then is the drug approved at that point so anybody can use it?
Exactly. And so the registration study, that's the one that we would agree with the FDA, how many patients should be in that study, what are the things that we should be assessing, in order for the FDA to make a decision as to whether they consider it to be safe and whether they consider it to be effective. If they are able, on the data that we generate, to assess both of those things, then the FDA will give the go-ahead for it to be available for general usage by whoever fits those criteria according to the physicians that would treat them.
Great. And another question is, how is international travel being handled during the coronavirus outbreak?
So, so we managed to enroll these children from Sweden, for example, in the middle of the pandemic. And so I think it was a joint effort with a team at the NIH and with the company, everybody getting together in order to be able to manage. The folks used commercial flights, and everybody was tested. They were tested before, they were tested when they got here. They stayed in quarantine at the NIH. And so we were able to do all those things, and the children were able to stay at the NIH for an extended time period in order to be able to be assessed before they went back to Sweden. So it has been possible to be able to enroll children in the study, even though we've had the pandemic. Things have gone very well.
Fantastic. Question about when it might be available for general use and where would that administration be done?
So that's a tough question, right? That really is. And it largely depends on how many patients need to be in the study from a registrational standpoint. We need to obviously enroll some more patients in the dose ranging and be able to make sure that we understand the dose and then get it into the registrational part of the program. Obviously every company that's here is working as hard as we can, as quickly as we can, in order to be able to get it. What we would like to do is to obviously meet with the FDA in the beginning of next year to get agreement with them and to get started as quickly as possible. And obviously all the patients that have been enrolled in the study are contributing towards the determination of whether it's safe and effective as well. So it's a matter of how many more patients do we need to enroll. So I don't know to be able to give a date, really don't know, but rest assured, everybody should rest assured that we're really working as hard as we can in order to be able to get it done.
This is a question about whether there are still slots open in part A of the study. I think you mentioned that there are some slots open for some patients at some doses.
That's right. We are still actively enrolling. And so if folks are interested in the study, again, reach out to Dr. Tift and her team at the NIH and let them know, let them give them some information about your child and let them give you an indication as to whether that would be an appropriate patient for the study. But yes, actively recruiting, please reach out to Dr. Tift and talk to her.
Okay. And other questions about how long the waiting list is, that would be a question for Dr. Tift.
Yep.
You mentioned a little bit about side effects, Gavin, but there's a question about any side effects from the patients that have been treated so far.
We haven't seen any. As I mentioned, we've had no serious adverse events associated with the product, which means there really have been no serious side effects. As I mentioned, there were a couple of things in which the liver function studies went up slightly, which you might expect when you give it intravenously, but there were really no abnormalities that persisted. They didn't need to be treated. So it's really more that you can see that the therapy was given, but there really have been no serious side effects in any way. And I would venture to say that with all the patients, it really looks like it's a very safe product that's really well tolerated.
And this last question, you may have to help me interpret it. I'm having a little trouble understanding it, but it says, would it be the case that the label cuts off at 12, like the trial?
So, you know what, that's part of the discussion with the FDA, right? So what we know is that we study the group of patients that we feel are the most likely to be able to benefit from the trial, so that we can, from the product at least, so that we can have data for the FDA to make a determination. Part of that determination, especially with rare diseases, is what the FDA would agree in this particular group of patients. Can we generalize that to patients across the spectrum that might be outside of the realm of what was studied in the clinical trial? And that's part of a discussion with the FDA of, do they have enough information to make the determination that you could use it outside of the range, the age range that was actually used in the study. So it becomes a bit of a negotiation, especially with rare diseases, as to how generalizable that data is.
Fantastic. Okay, some great questions, and I think that is it. If there are no other questions, I'd like to again say thanks to Gavin and to all of the speakers. Such an encouraging day for those of us who have been, you know, around and watching the progression of all this for a number of years. It's so exciting to have many, many companies involved in this work going forward. Are there any last questions for any of the other presenters? Okay, if not, thanks everybody for attending. It's been a great session, and look forward to seeing you all in the future.
Thanks so much.